had this weird dream. Bear with me, okay? I had this weird dream that I was in Oklahoma with Winnie the Pooh. But it wasn't Oklahoma. No, it was, but it was a forest in London. And Winnie the Pooh was like a painting of Winnie the Pooh, but he was also, you know what? Maybe you had to be there to understand. Sometimes I'll wake from a dream that feels so terrifying, or sad, or important, and I'll bring that feeling with me into the day, only to realize that by the time I try to explain it, I can't describe why it made me feel that way. The feeling the dream gave me just doesn't make sense anymore. This isn't a video of me telling you about my dreams. I know plenty of people out there feel themselves crumbling to dust when someone starts talking about a dream they had, so I'll respect that. I'll keep it on topic. That said, I do love hearing about people's dreams, so if you've got one you want to share, I'm all ears. There's something about the way dreams are that just doesn't make it out to the waking world. Some quality that ceases to exist the second we're no longer dreaming, that can't just be described with words. The strangeness behind dreams extends beyond the story, so just telling someone what happened isn't going to paint a very complete picture of what the dream was really like. And we know this. That's not news to anyone. The world of dreams doesn't just act different, it feels different. That's why dreams in media are often portrayed with haziness, warped environments, or a different colour palette or art style. Portraying the bizarre events of a dream isn't enough to tell the audience that what they're witnessing is one. Without any prior knowledge, I don't think someone presented with the opening scene to Paprika and the bridge scene from Spirited Away would have much of a chance of telling me which one is the dream sequence. Not all dreams are surreal, and not all that's surreal is a dream. You need to show the audience that what they're looking at, surreal or not, is a dream. You could do the classic fade in on a close-up of a sleeping person, but what I'm interested in is how media can create a scene that feels like a dream without needing to tell you. And of course, this depends entirely on how you dream. We can't see each other's dreams, so there's no way to accurately tell what dreams are like from person to person. So if you spent the video thinking that none of what I'm describing sounds like your dreams, I won't be too surprised. But I'm going to go through a few ways media can portray how it feels to dream. I think you'll find at least something that does what your dreams do. Dreams do have surreal elements, of course. Impossible things happen in my dreams all the time. But I find, and I found when looking into how other people dream, that more often than not, our dreams tend towards the familiar. But ludicrous, impossible imagery makes sense to play with on screen. It's interesting and fun to look at, so when creating dreams for media, you may want to go a bit wild with the visuals. But when we actually experience surrealism in dreams, it's often not in the form of crazy characters conjured from nowhere in reality. It's familiar things in places we don't normally see them, or behaving in ways they don't normally behave. Dreams are surreal, yes, but they come from our brains, so they act within a through line of reality, applying their own strange internal logic to things drawn from real life. In fiction, we see things we consider surreal all the time. Dragon attacks or portals to other worlds, although fantastical, can be possible if the world of the fiction says so. A bank and a lighthouse both exist in reality, they're completely possible, but in a dream, you might find yourself stepping through the doors of a bank and ending up at the top of a lighthouse. But if in Lord of the Rings, Frodo stepped through the doors of the Prancing Pony and there was Mount Doom, ready for him to just pop the ring into and completely ruin your movie marathon, you'd probably call it out as impossible. Because while dragons can exist in Middle-earth, Mount Doom being inside of a tavern can't. That's the difference between fantastical impossibility and dream impossibility. In a way, they're polar opposites. Whereas fiction takes impossible situations and makes them possible by agreeing on fictional logic, i.e. dragons exist and people can cast spells, dreams take things that are possible and make them impossible by removing the logic of reality. That's why impossible imagery isn't enough to make something feel like a dream. Things need to be impossible the way they are in dreams. In dreams, environments are pulled from reality. And again, this may vary from person to person, as will a lot of what I have to say, so that is the last time I'll add that caveat. People tend to dream about their work, their homes, places they've been, but your brain isn't exactly firing on all cylinders in your sleep, a point I will get back to in a moment. So, the environments in your dreams aren't put together the way they would be in the waking world. Because of this, art featuring objects or structures in places they wouldn't normally be remind me of how my dreams feel. And while I don't necessarily see sights like these when I dream, the dreams do feel like these pieces. They're made up of logical components fitting together in an illogical way. The island from the game Myst gives me this same feeling. Parts of it feel in place, like the library and planetarium, but then there's the spaceship and the gears. They both could exist, but they don't feel like they belong. It's almost as though they were scooped out of somewhere else and just slotted onto the island. And the more of the island you explore, the more you find that doesn't seem to fit. Myst Island is a collage of worlds stuck together for a purpose we don't yet understand. A lot like a dream, glued together pieces of our waking world for reasons we don't fully understand. We don't fully understand the logic of dreams, or why we have them. There isn't a scientific consensus on the how and why of dreams, and given that we can't measure them, it's hard to talk about the science of dreams with any amount of certainty. One study I've come across suggests that during REM sleep, which is when dreaming occurs, the parts of our brain dealing with logic aren't operating the way they would when we're awake, if they're even operating at all. This could explain the inconsistent logic of dreams. It's not that our brains are making up nonsense, they're just not applying logic the way we would expect to see in reality. That's just one study in a field with no real consensus, and I'm no oneirologist, but I think it paints a plausible picture of what our brains are doing while we dream. Dream logic is brought up a lot when people talk about how they dream. It includes what we just talked about with things like buildings appearing where they normally wouldn't, but it goes further than that. You could be walking down a hallway in a dream and the end of the hallway keeps stretching out, moving away from you, or you could open the door to your bedroom and find it's now the school you used to go to. You could walk through the streets of New York, but your legs walk in place as the city moves around you. Blink, and it's suddenly night, it's suddenly Italy, it's suddenly New Year's Eve. The dream sequences in the Sopranos episode, Funhouse, do this incredibly well, capturing the logic of dreams in a way I haven't seen anywhere else. In the episode, Tony Soprano is sick with food poisoning, and while sleeping, he has several fever dreams. In one of them, Tony is walking along a boardwalk until he's suddenly walking in place. A voice that's not next to him but all around can be heard, and then Silvio Dante slides on by, doing what I think is an impression of the Godfather. Tony appears at a viewer and looks through at what should be a closer view of the horizon, but instead, it shows him himself playing cards in a large, empty building. Walking in place or suddenly appearing at the tower viewer, the way Tony moves through the world feels very close to how navigation feels in dreams. Sometimes you're stuck in place, but sometimes the dream skips you ahead to make sense of the narrative your brain has created. Places far apart become right next to each other, and when it needs to, the world moves to you. And this goes beyond the physical space. Sometimes in a dream you might, for example, be in a coffee shop that's actually a submarine. It looks like a coffee shop, acts like one too, but in this dream it just is a submarine. No one needs to tell you that, there's zero evidence, zero reasoning, it just is. And something similar to that happens in another dream in this episode. In the dream, Tony meets up with a group of people from his life. They talk about the spring snow on the boardwalk, and then they ask him about his cancer diagnosis. And he answers, discussing with them his plan to self-immolate instead of dying the hard way. Well, the harder way, perhaps. Although, in reality he doesn't have cancer. But in the dream, he does. So, when they ask him about it, he responds as if it isn't news to him. He doesn't need them to tell him he has cancer before he understands that he does. It's dream logic. A detail that you don't see very often in media is that in dreams, you just know things. In dreams, you just know things. Simply knowing things without being told is, to me, the most underrepresented element of dreams. I had a dream while working on this video that took place in Lord of the Rings, but the setting was my home, and the people were regular of this world people. I just knew it was Lord of the Rings, even though there was absolutely nothing to suggest that. This is a part of dreams that's hard to get right. After all, without an internal monologue, we can't know for sure what a character is thinking, and by extension, what they know. But internal monologues don't tend to be part of a dream sequence. There are plenty of dream sequences in media that don't showcase the knowing things aspect of dreaming, but they don't have to. It's impressive if they can include it, but it's not inaccurate to leave it out. The cancer dream from The Sopranos is really the best example I can find, and I think with this, it's not so much that media doesn't get it right, it's that it often gets it wrong. Something I see fairly often with dream sequences is the dreaming character being confused by the dream. I can see why you might go this direction. The events of a dream are often confusing, but they aren't usually confusing to the people in the dream, including the dreamer. Take the dream sequence from the Simpsons episode Moaning Lisa. In the episode's B-plot, Homer has been losing to Bart at a boxing game and has a nightmare about him and Bart being the boxers in the game. He enters the dream with his eyes darting around and audibly confused, instead of just accepting the scenario as reality the way most of us would in a dream. Compare that to the dream Bart has in the season 4 episode Camp Krusty. In the dream, he's in school and receives his report card with all Fs, but Mrs. Krabappel is happy to change his grades to a C average, something that should surprise Bart, but doesn't. He's not even surprised when Principal Skinner speaks over the PA to ask if everyone has their destruction implements, and Bart pulls his destruction implement from his desk as the kids and staff alike begin destroying the school. Bart isn't surprised that any of this is happening. He even already knew to pull his destruction implement from the desk when Skinner gives the go-ahead. That's a lot more like the way dreams work. You're already part of the situation from the get-go. You don't need to be initiated. In the dream sequence from the season 3 episode Lisa's Pony, Homer is totally enveloped in the reality of the dream after falling asleep while driving, happy to accept that he's driving along a road filled with floating beds in place of cars. This only makes the joke funnier, as we the audience are aware of the reality and can only speculate on what's actually happening as Homer drives off a ramp in the dream and is carried away by angels, only for his car to have a part of the fence wedged in the wheel when we cut back to reality, leaving us to wonder what happened when we were watching the dream. That's a joke that simply wouldn't work if not for the way we know and accept things to be the way they are in dreams. And that does work the other way too. If a dream sequence is intended to be funny, then you may want to put a character in a situation where they have absolutely no idea what's going on. Take Chief Wiggum here in the season 7 premiere Who Shot Mr. Burns Part 2. In perfect contrast to the scene being parodied, which we'll get to in a moment, Wiggum is completely baffled by the strange, uncanny events of the dream. The strange, uncanny events of the dream sequences from Twin Peaks were my introduction to the show. First through the Simpsons parody, and then through many other parodies. So when I finally got around to watching Twin Peaks, I was struck by two things. One, how little the dreams were actually part of the show, and two, how much the rest of the show felt like a dream. Twin Peaks was created by Mark Frost and David Lynch. David Lynch in particular being a name that came up over and over and over while I was looking into media that feels like dreaming. The works of David Lynch are often referred to as dreamlike. They feature a lot of the elements I've talked about already. Inland Empire jumps and shifts and throws you from scene to scene following its own logic that we just have to go along with. And the diner scene from Mulholland Drive in particular is another rare example of just knowing things in a dream. In the scene, a man who I'm going to call Dan because that's what it says on IMDb, is describing a dream he had where he was in the diner feeling inexplicably scared. He explains that in the dream there's a man outside and the man is the one doing it. He doesn't explain how he knows or even what it is, likely because there is no explanation. He just knows. He goes outside to see if the man is really there and approaches a corner, somehow knowing that something is there. And in a strange way, this scene both is and isn't a dream. It's just Dan explaining the events of a dream, but then his reality starts to reflect the events that he's describing. David Lynch loves dreams, as suggested by the many dream sequences in his work, the way he talks about dreams and how often the word dream appears in a project of his. While his work showcases many elements of dreams, one element that stands out to me the most is the uncanniness. I don't think there's much in the way of dream logic or bizarre environments in Twin Peaks, although things do get surreal. To me, the most dreamlike quality of Twin Peaks is the way the people are. The uncanniness of dreams is perhaps the most subjective element I have to talk about, given that it relies on what you perceive as normal. I think to really understand what's uncanny about the people of Twin Peaks, you just need to watch Twin Peaks. The uncanniness isn't always there in Twin Peaks or Lynch's other works, and when it is, it's not always obvious. But if you watch, you'll soon start to feel it.
So since you agree, you must be a person who does not care about the good life.
How's that?
We'll stop for a little second and think about it. Can you do that for me?
There's a concept that originated in robotics known as the uncanny valley. It's a pretty popular idea, so I won't go too much into detail, but for those who don't know, the uncanny valley is the idea that the more human something appears, the more affinity we feel towards it, up until it reaches the point of near human likeness, where that affinity drops and we start to find it creepy or uncanny. And I think this is what's happening within David Lynch's work, but with the character's behaviour rather than their appearance. If we place a dialogue between two people on the uncanny valley graph, on the left would be complete gibberish, no real words, no real cadence, completely unrecognisable as a conversation. On the right is just a regular conversation you'd expect to have in real life. Somewhere in the centre, you might find two aliens conversing in something like Star Wars. Their cadence and attitude suggest a conversation, but we can't really put together what's being said, although we might get the gist of it from context. But for me, a lot of the dialogue in David Lynch's work goes here, in the valley, close to a totally ordinary conversation, but not quite all the way there. Sometimes they talk in a strange manner, sometimes it's a character bringing up some bizarre non sequitur, sometimes a character reacts to something in a way that feels wrong. The conversations look normal on the surface, but there's small details that are just a little off, pulling it right down to the uncanny valley. Just like a dream, all the right pieces are there, but not quite tied together the way they would be in reality. Watching Twin Peaks and the rest of Lynch's works feels like watching a dream, even when it isn't. When it isn't dragging you into a decrepit hellscape, Silent Hill 2 has a strange quiet to it. The world around you is empty and pale. When you do run into someone for the first time, she's surrounded by a bright fog, and it looks as though only the two of you exist. The fog is an ever-present symbol of Silent Hill. While you're in it, everything outside of your immediate surroundings fades away. It's as though only you exist. As you navigate the town, that feeling is almost confirmed when you come across dead ends that were obscured in the edges of the fog until they were right up against you. This necessity of game development pulling the outside world away. But it isn't just the fog that brings Silent Hill 2 into this dream space. Silent Hill 2 does just about everything I've talked about so far. The dialogue is intentionally Lynchian.
I didn't do anything. I swear. He was like this when I got here.
The world behaves with a strange, inconsistent logic. Characters often just know things. The world gets surreal, although more nightmarish than your standard dream. The remake of Silent Hill 2 came out in 2024, with updated visuals, an expanded world, and brand new actors. But one change that's come up fairly often when talking about the remake, a change that I doubt was deliberate, is the loss of the dreamlike feeling people get from the original. This is going to be subjective again, and I think there is still a dreamlike quality to the 2024 remake, but I would agree that it feels a lot less like a dream. The fog still obscures the world outside your perspective, but it also has a heavier, grounded feel to it. Throughout the remake, the world feels more solid, more tangible, and of course this is due in part to 2024 hardware being able to handle a lot more detail to sell the reality. A vast improvement in the remake, according to many, is in the performances. Luke Roberts in particular receiving a lot of praise for his portrayal of James Sunderland. But in these new performances, the uncanniness of the original has slipped away in a lot of places. And I think the big example people are drawn to for this, so it's the one I'm going to use as well, is the scene where James first meets Maria.
Mary? No, you're not.
Do I look like your girlfriend?
Do I look like your girlfriend?
Your voice, just your hair and clothes are
My
different.
name is Maria. I don't look like a ghost, do I?
Your face, your voice, you could be...
My name is Maria. I don't look like a ghost, do I?
While the performance in the remake is more grounded, the original sounds uncanny, just like the example from David Lynch. Both scenes take place surrounded by the fog, but in the remake the fog looks less ethereal. It backdrops Maria completely, making her feel like all that exists, but in the original Maria is in the fog, part of it even. And I want to make a point of how much I like the remake of Silent Hill 2. Just because it's less dreamlike doesn't mean Bloober Team did a bad job, and replaying the original for this video, I found myself enjoying it separately from the remake. I wouldn't go as far as to say it's like playing two different games, but I definitely got something different out of each. The remake still maintains the eerie quiet of Silent Hill, and the detail they've put into the town makes it feel genuine, like a once living town that's just stopped. The sound design in the remake is the best I've ever heard in a game. Building off the already strong sound design of the original, one part of the game in particular, in just its sound design taking the most scared I've ever been in a game spot away from Voices of the Void, and by proxy, making a liar out of me in my last video. All this to say, my claims of the remake being less dreamlike aren't a criticism of the game. It did what it set out to do incredibly well. It's just that the original captured the feel of a dream in a way the remake didn't, whether or not either game intended to. The remake to me feeling like a more grounded take on Silent Hill 2. I think that playing the original is what it feels like when you're in a dream, and the remake is what it feels like when you try to explain that dream when you're awake. When you're awake, your emotions aren't as heightened as they are in a dream. And yet, paradoxically, you'd react a lot stronger to something surreal happening. This isn't particularly deep. Obviously, you'd react strongly to something surreal happening in reality. That's where the surreal stuff isn't supposed to be. That's why it's called surreal. But we allude to dreamlike things happening in the waking world all the time. If something too good to be true happens to us, we say, "pinch me." If something awful happens, we call it a waking nightmare. Something unexpected, unusual, overly coincidental happens, we insist that it can't be real. While I was working on this script, I put in a lot of research, more than I have done in the past, mostly because some of the examples I came across were things I hadn't watched or played or experienced before. The further into my research, the more things started to connect. I'd be researching one topic only for one of the others to get name dropped in the article. Everything started to blend together, my mental map of the research becoming blurred, foggy. But out of everything I looked into, the one thing, the one name that popped up time and time again in articles, scientific journals, surveys I sent out myself, conversations with friends, YouTube comments, Reddit threads, my YouTube recommendations, was David Lynch. Because of course it was. And before this video, my only exposure to David Lynch was the first season of Twin Peaks. So I spent a few weeks reading interviews with him, watching videos of him, about him, watching his movies, rewatching Twin Peaks. I immersed myself in David Lynch as much as I had time to, until he was on my mind pretty much every waking moment. And then he died. It was after spending weeks reading about David Lynch, and the evening after a particularly full-on day of research, I saw his name pop up again. This time it was a notification on my phone telling me he died. It was, I think, the strangest feeling I've ever had. I won't get too sentimental here because it feels wrong to do that to someone I never knew, but I think it's worth talking about that experience, that sudden shock that the person who I'd basically been obsessing over for what was only really 2 to 3 weeks had died during that time. It felt surreal. It felt like I dreamt it. That's why I'm talking about this here. I think the topic of this whole video comes down to David Lynch. He was really the best ever to put dreams on screen. Working on this video, I was tired, I was falling asleep while working. Some of the things I was working on bled into my dreams, so it's fitting that this man, who spent his entire life blurring the lines between dreams and reality, managed to do the same to me, just because I was studying his work.
Cinema can say a dream logic, which is an abstraction. It can say things that are difficult to say in words. Just like when you have a dream, so much understanding for you, but when you try to tell your friend, it's very difficult to say in words something that will give your friend the same experience you had. So, but cinema can be the dream, can give that thing.